Welcome to Unit 4.4, where we're going to look at water pollution. In this video we'll have a look at the different types of water pollution and the sources. But it's always a good idea at the start of a new unit and the start of a subunit is that we think about the big questions that we've got here. So throughout this subunit, Unit 4.4, we're going to be looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the systems approach and the use of models through this topic. So we're going to be looking at pollution as an input and an output to the system, and we're also going to be looking at ways of modelling pollution and also measuring pollution as well. So that's one of the big questions that we're going to be having a think about. In addition to that, we will start thinking about, in a bit more detail, sustainability and those different stakeholders. In particular, solving the water pollution problem. As you will find out, water pollution is a significant problem. A key idea here, as you can see, is water pollution is a major problem which affects human and other biological systems. So when thinking about solving a problem, we got to think in a balanced way, and that will be looking at both preventing water pollution for this unit and also responding to it and trying to minimise its effects and clear up the water pollution. So when dealing with it, we got to think about those two strategies. And unfortunately, if you look around, you'll see very much that if there is going to be, in general, if there is going to be anything done about water pollution, it tends to be focused on cleaning up the mess rather than stopping it from happening in the first place. That's just an observation of mine, more of an opinion, so I'll be interested to see what you think about how, for example, Hong Kong SAR deals with pollution. Is the focus there on cleaning up the pollution or preventing it in the first place? So then again, we'll emphasise one of those key ideas that are coming through here. We're going to address issues in this topic that look at sustainability and sustainable development. Obviously, particularly for this unit, it is life, the SDG, life below water, but also the SDG that looks at life in the oceans. And then finally, in what ways might the solutions to water pollution be explored? And then we're going to be asking you to make your predictions for the future regarding regarding future water pollution and what you think the effects will be in the future on water pollution on both those human societies and biological systems. And we'll be asking you to think what's likely to happen in 20 or 30 years' time. So let's have a think about the different types of water pollution. So there are a number of different types of water pollution that we're going to look at. So type of aquatic pollutants can include floating debris. If you've looked at a river in an urban area, you'll see there's a lot of plastic bags and other garbage floating around in that. There's also organic material and inorganic. Now, the inorganic material, particularly in the form of plant nutrients, that can be particularly problematic, and there we'll be looking at nitrates and phosphates. We've already had a think about how those inorganic nitrates and phosphates, when they're in a terrestrial environment, are actually quite good because they act as fertilizers, but when they get into an aquatic environment, they do cause lots of problems and destabilize the ecosystem. In particular, it will affect the biological oxygen demand of the water. We've also got to think about things like toxic metals and other synthetic compounds. There are other, maybe less obvious forms of pollution. Hot water, oil, radioactive pollution, pathogens. Remember, previously in this unit we have looked at fish farming, and we said fish farming quite often that can give us quite a large population of pathogens, that is pests that grow on the farmed fish. There's also light and noise and biological pollutants, invasive species. One of the way those invasive species can get into particularly the marine ecosystem is on the side of ships, or actually on the side of ships, but also in the water that ships carry around with them. Every ship has what we call ballast water, and that's water that is taken into the ship to keep it stable. Particularly important if you have an empty ship. So when you take in that water, you'll be sucking in species, and when you release that water at your destination, there's a real danger that those species are going to be released into the environment. Alien species, introduction of alien species is always a bad thing for the ecosystem. Those invasive species and those non-indigenous species, it's always going to be bad news. So, like we said before, that those different sources of water pollution, they can be accidental or they can be deliberate. And one of the biggest sources of deliberate oil pollution is washing out fuel tanks, and we've also talked about the bilge or stabilising water that you have on boats. Sometimes it is deliberate release just because it's cheaper to release pollution into the environment than it is to deal with it. And there we are thinking about that concept of the tragedy of the commons. So we're seeing water resources as a common resource, and a common resource for the disposal of pollution. So sources of pollution, one of the big challenges that we have with pollution is a lot of it is non-point source. So if your pollution is coming from a factory, it is obviously easy to identify where that source of pollution. You go to the factory, and if you have a legal system, you can regulate against it, you can stop it. But non-point source pollutions, they don't have a specific point, so that would be principally runoff. And runoff from agricultural areas, runoff from rooftops, and runoff from roads. Now, we often think with water pollution, sewage is the most serious type of water pollution, but often it is the runoff from rooftops, but in particular roads, that can have very, very high levels of toxicity, high levels of pollution as well. So to put that into context with you, for you, that runoff from roads is especially concerning. Okay. So it can contain 5 to 6 times more heavy metal concentration than runoff from rooftops. Some quite disturbing statistics. If you take 1 kilometre of highway, it does actually have quite a lot of pollutants in there. So annual runoff, what would you get from a kilometre of highway, single carriage highway? Okay. Per kilometre per year, you get 1.5 tonnes of suspended sediment. That is not good for your ecosystem at all. Perhaps even more concerning, you get 4 kilograms of lead, 126 kilograms of oil, and 18 grams of hazardous polynuclear aromatic compounds. They are not good things to have in your system. We are talking about just 1 kilometre of single carriage roadway. So if it's a motorway, which is dual carriage, you double that up. So these are really significant levels of pollution, and types of pollution that we don't always consider. Now, oil is particularly damaging. That 126 kilograms of oil per year, per kilometre, is very damaging, and oil has a very high biological oxygen demand. Perhaps even more importantly, that biological oxygen demand of the oil can last longer than 5 days, and that's one of the Environmental Protection Department. That's one of the criteria where they say if you have a pollutant that has a high biological oxygen demand and this lasts for more than 5 days, it's particularly dangerous. So later on in this unit, we are going to be having a think about how to measure water quality. We're specifically going to have a look at biological oxygen demand, and then we're going to have a think about the effects of this water pollution on species, on the ecosystem, on the flora and fauna. Okay guys, so I hope you found this video useful. This video should be used in conjunction with the department website and your textbook as well. Thanks for listening guys.